Hello, everyone. I think people are coming in now. So, hi, welcome. I hope you can see the great poster for our event. I'm just going to wait for about a minute or so to let some more people file in, and then we'll do some quick introductions and get started. But I'm really excited for the event. So I can't wait to find out about data. I don't know about you. If you're here for the first time, let us know. Please introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you're from and what you want to know, so that I can put it in our conversation. And what else was I gonna say? I think we have some questions, but I'll talk about those in a second. So yeah, yeah. I'll give it 30 seconds and then I'll get started. Let me check the chat really quickly. Hi, Leslie. Thanks for saying hi in the chat. Okay, right. Let me get started. So, hello, everyone. My name is Tolulope from Akwaaba Fest. Today, we're talking to David, and I'm very excited. But I thought I'd give a quick introduction to Akwaaba Fest, and we're also doing this event with Tech in Color. So I'll let Dr. Nakima do an introduction of that as well, and then we'll get started. So, what is Akwaaba Fest? It's the first Black Tech Festival in Paris, hopefully happening physically in Paris next June, and it's about Black people in tech and getting Black people into tech, but not only highlighting the existing people working there and having them showcase their work, but also providing a space for anyone that looks like me or our Dr. Nakima to learn about tech from people that look like them and find role models that look exactly like them, because you can't be what you can't see, right? So having that visual representation is also really, really important. um I may have butchered the introduction a little bit, so I'll pass it on to Awa to say hi and let her take over for a little bit.
Actually, that was pretty great. I mean, you did great. So just saying the same. Hey, everyone. Thank you for being here, especially for the people in France. I know curfew is in like an hour and a half, and you're still here with us. So thank you for that. Um, I hope you enjoyed this session. We're recording it, and if you missed anything, you'll be able to watch it afterwards. And I'll let Dr. Nakima tell you a little bit more about Tech in Color.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm speaking from Berlin, where we don't have curfew for a couple more hours, but I'm really happy for everyone who's dialed in and is joining us from wherever you are. Tech in Color is a relatively new network. It was started partially to support the Akwaaba Fest initiative and to get more interest and more awareness out there about the Black Tech Fest and networking possibilities that Tolulope and Awa are building up in Paris. It's also intended to include more people, to connect more people, because there are so many amazing leaders who are working in tech since quite a while, like David, who we'll hear from, who are Black, who are brown, who are people of color, who are also struggling to find like-minded and similar people on the same trajectory, who would like to know what's happening in other parts of Europe, and especially how things are going in terms of increasing representation for people like us. So that's Tech in Color.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for that, Dr. Nakima. You can't get a PhD and I don't, respect that. If I'm correct, Awa will be partially manning the chat. Feel free to ask questions in the chat in general and contribute. But what we'd really like is if you ask questions on the Slido, which I will resend now into the chat. And it's great to kind of upvote questions that you're really interested in or ask questions yourself, and it's completely anonymous as well. So if there's anything you're interested in or anything possibly controversial that you want to ask, feel free to ask it over there and I will collate the questions. So really quickly before I introduce our amazing guest, it's an interactive session. I have a couple of questions to ask, just to get to know David, but please ask questions and I'll incorporate them as early as I can to make sure that everyone here gets their question answered and has a fulfilling experience. So, without further ado, David, please introduce yourself.
Ah, all right, I'm David. Um, you're goofy nerd, I guess. I've been building gadgets like machines, IoT devices, whatever, little robots and software as long as I can remember. Then at some point I figured out I'll study it because I had broken enough stuff at my parents' house, and that seemed like the most viable path to being able to pay them back for all the damage I caused. So yeah, I worked in the mine for a year in Suriname, where I was basically raised. Best year in terms of working for a boss, because I had my quad driving around doing like radio links, fixing computers and servers. And then I moved to the Netherlands to study engineering, and haven't had a job since, because I basically started contracting, freelancing, founding companies. And here we are. This is like the shortest like summary of my life, I guess. I'm currently in Vienna. Did this really interesting project. I do due diligences from time to time, for a friend's company. And I do engineering projects from time to time. I do interim CTO stints from time to time. So it's like really senior engineering problems, leadership problems that I focus on these days, that I really enjoy. Yeah, that's the short version for you.
Well, thanks. Let's make it longer.
Okay.
You
So where do you
said
want to dive? Because
we're gonna dive everywhere. Don't worry, we got time. We got time. So you said you've never had a job since. What does that mean?
I have a problem with authority. So I've basically worked for myself ever since I graduated. And I've caught a couple of breaks, obviously. I got contracted out of, plan was officially, I do my bachelor's at Hogeschool Rotterdam, which is where I got my engineering degree in electronics. And I was considering going to TU Delft to do a master's, maybe computer engineering or something else. But in the Netherlands, you have the system where you basically defend your thesis to your professors, but two people from industry. And both of the people from industry wanted to hire me. I told them, no, I'll freelance for you though, if you want that. And that's basically how I got started. One of them became my father in the Netherlands. So we're really good buddies now. He's my mentor, really good friend. And he's a chip designer. So you can imagine that the bar is really high in working with him. I've learned a lot there. I've then co-founded some startups that didn't do chip design, like basically E&M commerce type of companies. I've done a variety of different apps. I've done some IoT devices, built some smart, like green tech technology for the smart grid on an industrial scale, rolled machine learning models for different clients. And yeah, I'm kind of like a jack of all trades. So that's kind of like why I don't think I necessarily fit in a given company, because I don't want to do one thing over and over again. I get bored really quickly. And I need that freedom because I consider myself more of an artist, which means that I'm not going to do that 9 to 5 thing, because sometimes the best ideas don't come out of my head on command. And if I feel that I need to take a walk for 3 hours, then I need that flexibility to be able to do that. So yeah, that's why I haven't really taken a job in 7+ years.
Well, you work, right? Because
Yeah, I run my own companies. So right now I
yeah,
run my own engineering firm, which is
yeah.
a full-time, like 24/7 type of job. Um, but again, I structure the company how I see fit. Um, I work on my own schedule. I also work with contractors because I understand a lot of the people that I really want to work with that are really good don't necessarily feel like putting themselves inside of that framework of an employer-employee relationship. So in that case, they're like, listen, I'll freelance for you. If I decide to go to Thailand for a year and work from there, that's my decision. I should be able to do that. And I'm totally fine with that. It works really well. I understand the asynchronous communication thing. I understand that senior engineers need some form of autonomy and freedom to play around and do whatever they consider is necessary. And I think I have like found a nice way of kind of like guiding teams of senior engineers that may be slightly eccentric.
Cool. So what was the other thing I was going to ask? Yeah, so why did you go to the Netherlands to do your
I
undergrad?
was born in the Netherlands, so I carry a Dutch passport. I was raised there until my 5th year, and then my parents moved back to Suriname, South America. So for me, the Netherlands was a logical choice. I spoke the language. I was familiar with the culture. Um, I'm Dutch by passport, so I can basically fly back to the Netherlands at any time. And I'm Surinamese by heritage, so I can always go back to Suriname as well. So the Netherlands was just a natural choice. Also, the relationship between Suriname and the Netherlands is that Suriname was formerly a colony of the Netherlands. It only became independent in '75. So it's actually a very young state, and a lot of people just bounce back and forth between the two countries.
Okay. Thanks for that. Thanks for that information. And how was that? How was your undergrad? Why did you pick engineering? Because you did engineering, right? Just
Yeah,
general
so I
engineering.
picked electrical engineering because
Electrical.
I
Okay.
was tinkering around with electronics at home. I figured some stuff out, but a lot of it was still like black magic. It's like, oh, I want to know more about it. It fascinates you. Um, Computer science felt like I could manage that with tutorials and access to a good computer. So it felt a lot more accessible. The engineering part, I felt that I needed a lab for that, and I got that at university. So it was for me basically the next level down the stack. And I've been thinking about studying again in the last couple of years, 2 years. And if I had to study something, that would have to be physics now, because that's one
Mm,
layer deeper down the stack. Um, I just want to have like a general understanding of basically all the disciplines involved in making that work, for
mhm.
example.
I was just gonna say, as a computer science graduate, I am hashtag triggered, but I also have a maths degree, so that's like the deepest layer of the stack. So I feel kind of okay now.
Look at that.
Um, so after let's go in chronological order and then talk about the work that you do and then the companies that you run. So you finished your undergrad, um, you decided not to do a master's. What what pulled you to not do a master's? Or what pulled you in the other direction?
At my while defending my thesis, the job offers were really good offers. And I had this like, oh fuck it mentality. Let's give it a shot. I always felt like I could go back, which I could, um, and I wanted to develop that experience. I've always been enamored by the thought of doing something on my own, being a free agent, kind of. So the moment they basically communicate like, oh yeah, hell yeah, we want to have you, even as a freelancer. If you're going to be your first freelancer, let's go. Um, I'm down for that. I also figured that I'll learn a lot on the ground, anyways. I've had multiple situations after where I've basically been pairing with PhDs and operating like they're equals. So I guess I managed to gather a similar set of like depth um, through experience. So it's not formally acknowledged, but I spent, like, for example, I spent the last 3 days um, brainstorming with people that are arguably quantum physicists, and I was able to keep up. So apparently, it did work. Just getting on the ground running, gathering that experience and developing that intuition for how technology works. And maybe I'm not best suited to what was it? My professors always told me that I'm a really bad student because I'm kind of like an okay student. I perform well, but I want to know too much at exactly the time I decide I want to know it. And sometimes I just have to play ball and just accept that the system tells me like, yeah, this is what I have to do now. I just kind of like have to rehash this information, and I wouldn't do that effectively. So I figured like, okay, the opportunity for me to dive deeper is when I have a problem to solve and I can basically focus on a very narrow sliver of knowledge, dive all the way to the bottom, and then solve it. And over those few years, I've probably touched on a very narrow ML type of thingy, a very narrow like sensor thingy, something in the infrastructure space, like some electronics. That fits me really well, I figured. And I think at the end of the day, like multiple people do different things. I had this other kid in my class who was brilliant at working out theory, couldn't solder a board to save their lives. And that's when I learned to appreciate that we all have like different roles in this complicated machine. Some people are like running on the ground, like putting things together, like hacking, busting, as we call it in German. And others are the ones who like really understand the fundamentals, can tell you exactly how everything fits together, but they can't really build it. And they really, really need those other folks to help them out. And I'm just basically playing to my strengths. So that's kind of like how it happened. I recognize that this might be something that fits me really well.
Interesting. And if you, with all the knowledge and everything that you've acquired today, if you were to go back to when you presented your thesis and you were thinking about the next step, would you still make the same decision? Would you still do a master's?
Absolutely. So I think one thing that, so the person, like my father, I met my father because I said yes to that, right? My second father. I have my father, my biological father in Suriname, love him to bits and pieces. I have calls with him every week about how my company is doing and all the struggles in my life, spiritual, emotional, whatever else. And then this is my father on the other side, who I talk about engineering problems with, who can even walk me through theory that I may not understand because he went all the way through the academic system, and he's probably one of the smartest engineers that I know. I think like sometimes you have these opportunities where you can meet certain people that are really worth taking, but you don't know it when you're right at the basically threshold into that decision. And I've only found out like a few months in, like, holy smokes, we really vibe together. And then here we are 7 years later, roundabout, still having calls on a regular basis with that dude. Yeah, and that's amazing.
Wow.
So I wouldn't give that up for anything. I also think that at the time, I was very well aware that if I'm going to do something with startups or in engineering in any capacity, I don't really need I don't really have to go through the entire system. I just have to be able to prove that I can deliver. And there have been plenty of people, notable founders, who have either dropped out. I figured I couldn't drop out. I wanted to because I wanted to start a company before, but I figured like I owed it to my family to at least get one degree before I opted out. So it was more of a technicality for me to get that one degree. I haven't used that accolade since. So I'm not necessarily using it. I do value the fundamentals that I've learned there. So I apply that on a regular basis, but no one really asks me for my degree. And I don't even know where my diploma is right now. But I mean, like different scenarios, right? I think I've just had that network where people recommended me for different gigs, and that's how it keeps working right now. And that's how I keep busy. And now by this time, I have done so many different projects. I've kind of like built different startups. I've served different companies in the interim CTOing capacity. Headhunters are trying to get me placed at companies as either VP of engineering or CTO. And now I don't even need to talk about it anymore because I just have my track record to show for it. So it kind of like worked out for me, but I would still say, like, if I see a group of children, I say finish school because the fundamentals are really important. Yeah.
Thank you very much for saying what I was about to say. I was going to say David is David, and he's already explained, how he likes to think about things and how he likes to approach certain topics. So like he said, if he saw kids, he would say finish school. So really consider all of your options and don't just watch this amazing inspirational figure and follow their footsteps. Okay, so let's get on to the companies then, because I can feel it from the way that you're talking about it. You were just ready to hit the ground running and do what you do. So tell us about I don't think there's much of a like day-to-day typical week or anything, but tell us about your companies and what you do with them.
All right, so my current company is basically an engineering practice. So I have a couple of clients. They come to me whenever they have an R&D problem, effectively, and that could either be like, oh, we're trying to build this device that does X, Y, Z. And then we sign NDAs, and I have to court them such that they feel comfortable enough to spill their beans. And once they're comfortable enough, we can actually start speccing out what we're going to build. And then we do prototypes in different stages until we can take it to production. And I can do that. I have like a vast team that I can access to actually roll out devices like that. But because nowadays, most of these IoT devices, they have to either communicate, I kind of like have to bring in a lot of these different domains. The hardware problem is one that we solve, but the infrastructure, like cloud compute problem, is something that is almost always connected to it. And that then brings with it either some web or mobile app component to manage whatever is right there in that cloud environment. So, and then if I'm lucky, I can pull out the big guns and do some ML stuff to make sense of the data that is somewhere there. So that is kind of like how I've been hovering around all of these topics over the last couple of years. And I don't necessarily think it's changing. I think my main focus is just to kind of like make sense of how to deal with more of the economic complexity that I'm dealing with rather than making sense of the technological parts. Because of course, Corona was an interesting adventure or learning experience in the sense that R&D is usually done when life is good and people have money in the bank. And then they start thinking like, okay, so we have money in the bank, but we want to be relevant tomorrow. How do we do that? And then they can call people like David. But if Corona hits, people are like, let me sit on that cash. So I've been really finding out how difficult it is to get R&D projects in the middle of a pandemic, effectively. But then on the flip side, I'm kind of like experimenting with a couple of ideas for startup companies that I can found, basically as a spin-off from the work we have done before. So one of those ideas that I'm flirting around with, where some startups are testing some of my tech, is basically templates for tech, where we come in and we basically give you the groundwork to build on top of. Because in most of my consulting gigs, I walk into companies that are effectively building 99% of what their competitors or peers are building. Everyone needs some infrastructure provisioned and needs to manage IAM policies. And I don't understand what the real value is for any company to spend too much thought in doing that, but it still takes people easily a couple of weeks to just figure out IAM policies sometimes. Like if there are enough people in the organization and there are enough different services that you use, it gets complicated rather quickly. And I hate having to do that. So I basically have those templates that I can reuse and sometimes revise, which is for me a lot more productive than like dropping into a problem 6 months later and then kind of like having to think of everything from scratch. So that's one thing that I'm playing around with. And then I have like a startup not far from where I live that I'm supporting in an interim capacity, CTO then. And then I do DDs for the company of a good friend of mine, which are really, really fun because they allow me to look inside the kitchens of different startups with different problems, very different skill levels, and kind of try to make sense for investors, whether this is, whether they are pitching what is really there or what they can really accomplish and highlight what the red flags or risks are. And for me, that's kind of like my university time now. I go to like classes by going to these different startups and taking notes, and then basically relating that to my own work. And that way I can basically spot trends earlier and also spot how not to build things because I can see things explode in different corners of the world. So yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, so he said DD, he means due diligence, which we'll get onto in a second, but we have some questions that tie into what you've just spoken about. So one is, can you give examples of IoT apps that you've developed?
I wouldn't be able to say that because of NDAs, which is also why, which is also an interesting thing that I'm dealing with now because R&D is something super sensitive. My clients don't always feel comfortable if their competitor knows exactly where to get what they have. So in many cases, I provide people that sense of comfort by telling them like, yeah, okay, like, listen, we're not talking about it. And then we basically retrain them so they can fully own it. But that's also why I don't necessarily have too much showcase projects. And that's also why most of the projects come in through my network. So I actually don't even need to do marketing and advertising. But the downside of that is that a lot of people can't really see what I've built. Or I can like gently nudge them in private and tell them that I'm breaking NDA. So you should basically invite me out for beers. And then ask me after a couple of them, and then I might just say it as long as it's not on camera.
Well, I was gonna say, are we not in private now? Like, it's only a few people in this the
It's
call.
only a few volts, right? Yeah. So you know the thing is, I can get sued, and I've been doing well so far in keeping legal disputes rather minimal. So I'm not gonna open that can of worms yet.
No, I was only joking. And by the way, before when he said R&D, he means research and development. So I guess there's really secretive parts of companies that want to do
Sometimes it is.
innovative stuff.
Yeah, it's definitely secretive. Like I had, like very vaguely, for example, some of the things that happen are sometimes there's the corporates that are trying to play around with this other idea, and then it's usually already very sensitive to talk to me about it. And if their competitor were to find out, they would basically throw a couple million at the problem, build a team, and try to beat them to market. So sometimes these are really fierce competitions, and yeah, that's also why it's sometimes very unclear what I can and can't even say out in public. But it's fun work. So I'd rather have the downside of not being able to tell everyone what I'm doing if it means I can work on these cool things behind the scenes, and then sometimes see things out there where I can have this little feeling inside it and a chuckle, or I'm like, yeah, we contributed to that.
So of course, the big projects, the projects that probably pay your bills and stuff, are the very secretive NDA projects. But you must have done things at university, or you must have done things to just test out your skills. Do you have any projects that you can talk about that are IoT based?
Yeah, so I built some home automation systems back then. That was in college that I could talk about. I built a track and tracer for a Belgian logistic company for trucking systems effectively. That was about 5 years ago. I worked on a company, a spin-off from the TU Delft that was building window blinds that track the sun in order to be able to control the amount of sunlight getting into an apartment or office space, and basically be able to bounce direct light back, which saves heating costs, but also lighting, minimizes your artificial lighting needs. And there we basically had to design a sensor from scratch because we had mechanical constraints. And then we figured out a way to use magnetic fields to accurately enough, with sufficient accuracy, detect the orientation of the blinds. And then we wrote some firmware for that, trained some models to help with like to help identify the orientation of the blind, and do the calibration on site. And that was then maybe about 4-ish years ago. And then more recently, about 3 years ago, I worked on something that is even less visible. That was some routing software for a smart grid installation, effectively, where the client was working for a German automotive party that basically had electric vehicle batteries in warehouses, like 20 megawatts and up. And they were basically buffering the smart grid by sinking energy into the network whenever there was extra demand. And then whenever there was too much supply from sustainable sources, such as wind or solar farms, they could sink them into the batteries, and kind of like allow for balance that dynamism a little out. So that was like a really adventurous project. Probably one of the bigger ones I've worked on, and also one that nicely, that was actually, it has a really nice anecdote because it backfired a little bit because it was so complex, and we had a team that was working on things, and my component was part of the routing software, which was complicated enough for us because we had there was some trading involved, there was some estimation involved, and then we got fired from the gig. And then rehired a few days later when they found out that other things exploded, but our part was still running. Now, of course, our part still wasn't perfect, but it's kind of like cool to see that when you're like at that edge, building things, like things sometimes just explode, and sometimes you take the fall. And of course, it hurts a lot because for me, maybe not completely. It was my birthday. I was in New York. And that, like, I checked into the office and they said, like, okay, David, we're going to end the contract with your firm because this happened. And I basically texted them back, like, okay, thanks for this. Just find out. I had hunches that I had a feeling that something wasn't right there. So I told them, like, maybe you just want to check what's really going on, just for your own sake, because you need that information. And then just call me if there's anything. No hard feelings. I had the best birthday of my life because the tension was gone. I just roamed around. I visited museums. I had my coffees and whatnot. And the day after, they texted me again, like, oh, by the way, your thing was running. Can you help us like deploy some of this stuff? And then I basically just negotiated a better deal, of course, for a shorter time frame to just help them out with that. And that was it. So yeah, that was kind of like it, yeah. And then another thing that I've done recently is like a lot of machine learning models. So we help companies do like detection in videos. We've helped another organization, which is actually, okay, I can't even say their names.
Yeah, let's not talk about it.
Yeah, okay, but we even helped some educational institutions in drafting parts of their curriculum. So I've had the chance of just dabbling around in so many different corners.
Yeah, I love how we got from IoT to machine learning. We have some questions about the fact that we're not getting all the juicy details. So if you can't showcase your projects, how do you build trust with potential clients?
Network. So almost everything that happens is because someone knows me, has worked with me or my team, and repeat business either comes in. And within, so I'm kind of like lucky that within certain startup communities, some people know me that are involved with enough different startups that new gigs come my way. Also, the people who know me usually know me as the person who can bring all of those things together. which means usually I'm the person they think about if they have a problem that is broad enough. And that's basically how I can more or less fly under the radar. I haven't thought about marketing once until Corona happened, and then I like realized like, oh, maybe I should do a little bit more marketing because everything was slow. But I mean, now things are picking up again. So
I was
yeah.
gonna say, is that your secret motive for doing this event?
What is a secret? What?
Is that your secret motive to do some marketing? You're talking to us for some marketing. No, I'm joking.
You mean the motive? It's maybe not so secret at all. I think it's just getting more visibility. And it's also why I've been thinking a lot more about building just some showcase stuff. But then again, you know, the problem there is you want to build some showcase stuff, but then we don't really have so much time to randomly build this cool little bot that people can play with and program from their smartphones. Blah, kind of like thinking maybe it's funny now that we're talking about it, I'm actually thinking that maybe I could do this.
Oh, we can have tutorials. You can take us through it. We're here for it. Please showcase with us. I'm excited to see.
Remember, this is where it started. Okay. That's a nice idea. I like that. Maybe that's a nice showcase project that I can actually set up. Okay, cool. But yeah, I'm getting distracted.
No, it's good. It's good. We love it. We love it. There was something else. If we can quickly backtrack so that we don't come back here before the end. The question was, what was the subject of your thesis?
Yeah, that was a while ago. I've written a bunch of weird articles for clients. But meanwhile, subject was something around home automation. I don't even remember the subject of my thesis anymore. I just remember what I built, and the rest of it was almost noise to me now. So I basically built kind of like a Google Home setup without the voice activation. So you could like connect all of your lamps, like curtains, actuators, or like systems for doors, and basically control them and have a panel where you could monitor that. And there was like a server running with an API that you could basically access to control the home. And that is basically what I broke down into the thesis. But since it's bachelor's, it wasn't research really, it was just application. And yeah, I've forgotten it. Like it's probably somewhere where my diploma is.
Yeah, maybe that's why it's just physically that far back in your mind.
Yeah, so, 7 years plus. And I think I've thought about what happened in the past 7 years. And I don't know, for some reason I ended up working, like I ended up getting contracted by companies in New York twice. I built 2, 3, maybe 4 companies, most of which didn't make it. I have basically seen a couple of clients crash and burn because of some legal disputes that happened along the way or some other weird stuff. Like I think there was just so much chaos that happened in those 7 years that I don't even remember what exactly has happened. Yeah. I sometimes flip through my LinkedIn or my Instagram, and then I'm like, holy smokes, that actually did happen. Yeah.
Okay, let's get positive. And talk about.
It's not bad actually, because I think it's almost like a movie. When I think back about those things, I'm like, holy smokes, this was amazing. Because I mean, like from the episode where a client crashed and burned, I learned how to vet clients better. And also I learned to listen to my gut feelings, because I think I walked in and from the first day I said like, this is really chaotic for a company. And they told me this is how American startups roll. And I was like, oh, I'm sorry. Like I've only done this in the Netherlands and Germany maybe. So maybe I really don't know how American companies roll. And then it exploded and I was like, ha, it was really unhealthy. So now whenever I see that, I'm just out. I'm done. I'm also too old for this stuff now. So they're all positive experiences to be honest. Even the one that I got fired at, I kind of like, I think back about it, and I smile, because it relates to like tension in projects, but it sometimes also relates to the need for like some peace and quiet. And I think that kind of like that episode created this unwanted vacuum that I really needed somehow at that point in time. So yeah, all of them were very, very good experiences, TBH.
Okay. Another question about your work. So when you were starting out, no, the question moved. There we go. When you were starting out or not very well known, how did you deal with imposter syndrome? Oh, if you were
Um,
surrounded by PhD.
I haven't fixed that yet. So I still have it. I talk a lot about it with my friends. The older I also read that book, the Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. I think I've learned to appreciate that I don't know so much, and that's okay. Because it's not just about knowing much. There are a lot of things that every one of us can bring to the table, and you just have to find what it is that you bring to the table. So, and in my case, I know that some people like working with me because I'm a little bit of a weird, like funny type. I can understand problems relatively quickly, and I can break bad news to people in a manner that is like relatively easy to process. So the people bit is okay with me, which I learned over those years. That way I don't have to be the smartest person in the room. And I have this high level overview, which kind of like works for me. So I've basically accepted that there is just no way that as a kind of like jack of all trades, you can be really, really good at what you do. And sometimes you just have to suck it up and go for it. But I talk with my friends a lot about it, and that helps me through it. And then I do like talks like these, and then it also helps me deal with my feelings. It's like sitting on a couch, which I literally am doing right now, talking to my therapist.
Well, I do not have the expertise.
I, I don't know, like sometimes your friends are your therapists. All of our friends and family members, all of our loved ones are our therapists. So just talk about it, because I think once you're vulnerable and out, like you communicate about it clearly, you'll find out that a lot of people out there, people that you think are way smarter than you, deal with some semblance of that problem as well. And once you realize that, you kind of like you frame it, and then you're like, then it's not such a big problem because we all kind of like have some variation of this problem, unless you run into these few folks that really think they know it all, who then don't. But then it's just comical, so that's a completely different thing. Yeah.
This is great. I feel like we're learning a cheeky bit about IoT. We're getting some healing. We're all overcoming imposter syndrome. This is amazing. So really quickly, you do not have to answer this question if you don't want to, but it says you seem to have so much work. How old are you?
32.
Thank you for the answer. And then another one again about work is what are the downsides of working as a freelancer?
um so I think so as a classical freelancer, the problem is always deal flow. So that visibility thing, like I have my internal network and that works for me, but if within my network, which is still a bubble, obviously, something happens, then that reflects in the amount of requests that come in. So that is of course always a little bit frightening. Um, that is for me the only possible downside, because I have my team around me that I work with, so I still have the social aspect. I have like a space where I can go, where I can co-work with other people. Maybe not when it's Corona, but like, all of these things I have access to. And I think if you're a freelancer working alone, I think it's healthy to try to find these things. As a person, because that's also how you advance as an engineer or a scientist, is by surrounding yourself with peers that you can have these water cooler conversations with that sometimes spark ideas. Yeah, I think that is one way of dealing with the difficulties of being a freelancer, for example.
Wow. I mean, so you said that you work with subcontractors and you have a team. So do you employ your team?
Nope. Most of the people that I work with are as stupid as I am, so they're like freelancers working from wherever they want to work, and they have a problem with authority, so I can't really tell them what to do. So that works out well, and those personalities, we kind of like get along. And then usually there are a couple of companies that I contract for certain parts of projects that we get. So what would usually happen, there's a project that comes in and we do architecture, we do some R&D work and early tests on the hardware side, we set up some of the tooling, and then we hire a company to do some bits of implementation that might not be super exciting for us because most of us are still senior engineers. So we are not necessarily at a point where we can do all of the things ourselves because it's just boring or a waste of time. So we find that people that are more junior, either we contract them or we find a company that has access to those junior people that can then execute kind of like grunt work or rote tasks. So that's how it works for me. I've learned over the last year to not do certain things myself anymore because it just takes time. Just imagine like this very typical problem, like as a software developer, how many times are you going to reload whatever is in your browser to test it? And is that really the value you're supposed to be adding? Definitely not. And even with machine learning problems, like on a high level, I would like basically come up with strategies to like test a certain thesis, and then I would send it off for implementation or even optimization work. Yeah, and that's kind of like how it happens these days.
That's really interesting. So I want to kind of pivot into other things. So I want to get some of your definitions on things. So I think
Okay.
the one of the two buzzwords that we had on the kind of flyer and promotional stuff were big data, buzzwords, buzz phrases, whatever, big data and data management. So what are your definitions of each of those respectively?
So for me, when I think about big data, I'm kind of like thinking about stuff that doesn't make sense processing on a really good computer. So we're talking about a couple hundred terabytes of data. That for me is big enough to call big data. And of course, this is the threshold is different for everyone. Some people will basically start talking when it's about above a couple of petabytes of data, and terabytes don't do anything for them. But yeah, that's kind of like where I set that line. And it of course it depends per company because we've had organizations that deal with big data because it's video data, which is big quickly. So then it's really easy to get into that box. And you have other companies that basically just manage records of information, structured or unstructured, which, I mean, then you have to have a crap load of information to hit certain sizes. And yeah, that one company was basically tracking a lot of basically metrics, and then you could do analysis on those. So it can be anything as long as it's large enough to not be processable on whatever machine I have lying around randomly. So you have to build custom infrastructure to be able to to handle it and make sense of what's in there.
Ah, cool. And what's data management to you?
For me, data management is the entire circus involving the storing, managing access, fulfilling compliance requirements, who can see it, when have they seen it, when is it modified, and all of these things, again, which is so interesting about this problem is that they're very different for different industries. We once had an engagement with a fintech company, and I mean, even for us to be able to get involved as a supplier to do anything for them required us to walk through a certain legal dance effectively to meet compliance requirements. And I mean, all of these things are part of your data management strategy. So yeah, does that answer the question a little bit?
Yeah, your definition is your definition. So that's great. Let's talk about compliance. Let's get a little bit controversial. So first, what is data compliance and how many people actually do it? And then what I really want to know is, have you ever had moral dilemmas in managing data of anyone that you've worked with?
Did I have dilemmas? Yeah, yeah, sometimes.
I knew it.
Which it gets easier though, because I think some of the legal constraints that are being introduced make it easier for people to work with organizations as well. And you can't do anything you want to do with data anymore, not if you don't want to get into trouble. And the moment your organization you grow large enough, it's almost certain that someone is going to be able to flag it. Um, so you kind of like have to think about um, dealing, handling data ethically. Um, on the compliance side, what was the compliance question again?
What is compliance?
Okay, yeah, so the compliance bit has more to do with legal guidelines that are there, or even regulations that are there that we need to fulfill. These regulations can have something to do with what can be stored about individuals, how does it have to be stored, how many people in an organization can see it. For example, a small organization is very quickly and very easily, a lot of developers have just access to the data. But the moment an organization grows and the sensitivity of the data increases, or not sensitivity, but just the nature of the data becomes more sensitive to individuals, you basically have to sandbox certain things, and almost introduce the tooling to automatically allow developers to get their work done without having access to sensitive data, to allow the financial department to be able to get whatever insights they need without being able to tamper with it, and then have whatever reporting output from that to meet legal requirements that may have been introduced by regulators, or even the company itself, or clients, for example. Um, and that is rather complicated, because people try to commit fraud if they can. You'll have to figure out how to counter that, how to maybe identify whenever people are actually tampering with some information. You have like different strategies to introduce different walls or other protective mechanisms to ensure that the integrity of the operation maintains intact. And the larger the company gets, the more complicated this problem becomes.
Okay. What was I going to ask about that? Oh yeah, so I guess with all of that, part of your job is to know what people can and can't do without data, right?
Not always. Um, so in some cases, we can help people understand, but uh, I'm I'm not a lawyer, and I mean, like, even lawyers, like, spoke to a person who basically studied GDPR law and wrote a thesis on it, and
Wow.
that person doesn't know exactly what they can and can't do all the time. So I mean, like, we don't have, how do you call it? Just we don't have enough cases through court to inform how all of the regulations are to be interpreted yet. We do have a rough understanding, but I mean, like, what does it mean that some information is not necessarily identified, like mappable to a certain individual? It's a very vague criteria, like basically vague criteria to set. If, like, right now, if you have a couple of data points about a couple of people, we may not be able to map them to an individual, but if we have enough data over time, at some point you can map that data to an individual. So how do you then draw the line of this is too far? There are no metrics that we can introduce right now that work for all cases. So you basically have to take it on a case by case basis. And I think that's the challenging part, because we're all trying to do the right thing, but sometimes it's easy to then also, like, forget certain things or lose certain things out of sight. because that problem of like, oh, the data set growing and all of a sudden something being identifiable to an individual, like, yeah, you would have to regularly test for that to then know that it's there. And how do you then know how to test for that? Like, which data points do you put together to then recognize, like, holy smokes, we need to anonymize this more. There are companies that's also why it's interesting. A bunch of companies now that are actually building technology to help companies with that. And I think that's going to be more of a focal point going forward.
My question for you is, have you ever had companies kind of do the opposite and say, you know, a little bit about data, how far can we go? Like, how far can we legally go with the data?
Nah, not really. So that's a nice thing about your network. If people who come to me are usually friends, friendly, think more or less alike, definitely in my bubble. So the moment they reach out to me, we're almost on a wavelength. And the people that want to do those things are not necessarily in my circle yet. So I don't have people that come over with nefarious plans to dominate the world. I mean, like, we joke about it sometimes, but I hope it's not serious.
Yeah, let's hope so. Let's hope so. So we've got about half an hour left. If anyone has any burning questions, now's the time to ask so I can slot it into our conversation. But I'm going to hit you with one, which, again, open to your answer is going to be a correct answer. And my question is data the new oil?
I don't know. Why do we collect data? I feel that, like, I imagine that in the future, we could have a bunch of boutique companies that basically provide models, because I don't think we really care about the data. We care more about the models that we can extract from the data. So I'm not so sure. And also, I mean, like, legally, it doesn't look like that's a path forward that makes a lot of sense. Opinion. So it doesn't really matter what I say. I think the models make more sense, because the data, we just collect the data to extract the models anyways. So if you can get to the model right away, maybe you're better off. So I would assume or hope that in the future there are just a couple of boutique companies around us that we can basically walk to get certain models that we need for a given problem we have, and maybe tweak them, and that way not have to deal with some of the complexity that we get or introduce into our organizations when we decide to take the data in-house. And maybe that's a leaner way to go. That's what I'm thinking right now. I also thought, like, big data, like data was the new oil like 5 years ago, and every client was doing something big data related. And now I'm not so sure. Yeah,
I'll take that. I'll take that. By the way, quick shout out to Awa. Awa has she made a cool point in her podcast. So if you understand French, Awa, please link your podcast, because her points were really cool, about whether or not data is the new oil. Okay, so question about data again, obviously. For clients that you've worked for, where is the data preferred to be housed? On premises, data centers, or cloud? What percentage of your work is cloud native?
I think over 80%, I believe. The clients that wanted to have things on premise are usually companies in the medical space, usually European based, because they are very cautious about where they domicile their data. Most SaaS companies that gather data, consumer facing especially, they don't have the they don't need that stringency. So they're quite flexible in where they can domicile it. And then, of course, if you want to be flexible, you're probably just going to, like, domicile in the cloud, because you don't want to think about the housekeeping necessary to keep that all afloat. So I would definitely say over 80% cloud native.
Wow. We could have a whole session on cloud and AWS and GCP and like I really want to talk about that.
Yeah, go
But
for it.
no, because it's about like world domination and how everything is and how everything's on AWS, and if Amazon decide to do anything tomorrow, like Netflix will go down, so many things will go down. And so that's like more of a kind of debate.
Mm.
And it's just literally centered around this, well, not just the where data is housed, because if data is housed in the cloud as well, the code that runs that data is also housed there, and then what is yours, and what do you actually have control over, and etc
It's a
etc.
tricky one, because I mean, of course, it's a convenience. You trade off convenience for something else, right? And for like in Germany, there are plenty of companies, not the majority of them still, at least not the ones I encounter, but there's still plenty of companies that are very cautious of AWS. But within the startup space, there are just people are just comfortable with it, and it works, and it works quickly, effectively. So it saves you some time. And I mean, look, we've had cases where we tried to roll things in a more platform agnostic manner. So let's say it can run on AWS or Azure or Google Cloud Platform, or maybe your own like DigitalOcean setup, or maybe even a Hetzner in Germany, for example. But the heavy lifting required to do that, you don't always want to deal with that. One thing that we do like to do is kind of like find a nice middle ground between using the big cloud providers for some things. So we tend to use managed databases wherever we can, because database management is just really tricky sometimes, especially when you have to do things like sharding and whatnot, and think about locating where you locate your storage resources. But then when we have other parts of our setups, mostly compute, we try to use certain tools that can be deployed anywhere, which gives us a little bit of flexibility. And sometimes you don't even have to deploy the tools yourself. Sometimes you can use managed versions of those tools and try to model things such that there is a path to migrate. But it's still challenging to do that, because it's like building on top of abstraction layers. At some point you lose something. And we've even had to play around with basically multi-cloud setups. And that is even more challenging because Amazon hits you hard the moment you leave their machines. That's something we haven't really cracked yet. We're playing right now. So that company where I'm building those templates, we're actually building multi-cloud configurations between GCP, AWS, Azure, and maybe DigitalOcean. We also have some clusters running, and we're trying to figure out like, what if we have to like move 50 tera or 100 tera from AWS to like, these are tricky problems, and right now they hurt a lot, like in your pockets. And I mean, in some cases, I'm not even sure if you're supposed to do it over the network. Amazon has this service where they basically send you a truck full of data. In some cases, that's just the way it's going to go. But there is definitely some value to building those multi-cloud setups, in with regards to flexibility, if one of them drops out or you end up in a legal dispute with them. But then also you have to factor in the likelihood of that happening. I don't think Amazon is going away anytime soon. I think what's going to happen if shit hits the fan, then they will break up Amazon and AWS becomes its own entity, with completely different board, different management, and the retail arm of Amazon probably gets split up in several different branches. And then maybe it becomes a lot easier for people to live with an entity such as an AWS. I don't know. For me, I've given up a little bit. I boycott Amazon's retail arm, but I consume a lot of their computers. Like, I'm such a hypocrite in that sense. And I'm on Netflix, so I mean, like, at some point you can't really get around them.
Yeah, again, Awa has a great episode on how somebody blogged their experience of trying to leave Amazon, and then they realized stuff like Netflix was running on AWS, and it was much harder than they initially anticipated. That's quite an old episode, by the way, if you're interested. But that's basically what I was saying. So you said when you try to leave Amazon, they hit you hard, and I'm saying if tomorrow, it's a low barrier of entry. S3 is basically free.
Mhm.
If tomorrow they started charging you like 1,000 of whatever your currency per megabyte, what are you going to do? Like, how are you going to leave the platform? But let's look, I'm going to leave that as a rhetorical question because there are so many more interesting questions to go through. So loads of people want to know about you or about things that aren't really related with data. So there was one that was, how is the tech field in Suriname?
Well, there are a bunch of things happening. I'm not super in tune because I haven't been there in a while, like a year, which is a long time, of course. There there are different companies trying to build some technology. Like a couple of things are not set up yet that have recently happened. Like we have online banking, obviously, but it's not as smooth as it is here. So I think there are a couple of like fundamental steps that we have to introduce to then open up this entire new space of opportunity. And on the flip side, I think the population is rather small. So it's like I'm really embarrassed to say it because I have like a bunch of ideas. A friend of mine and we basically thought about doing this payment solution in Suriname a while ago, and we were basically talking to people who worked at banking institutions in the Netherlands to help us figure out the legal framework, because we were going to found the company in the Netherlands to wire money from the Netherlands to Suriname without getting hit by those Western Union fees. That didn't work out because of all the legal technicalities in setting that up. But at the same time, if you're trying to walk to an investor for a product for a country of 600,000 people, that's a tough sell. It's easier to raise money for a market that's considerably larger. So if I have to pitch something to to an investor and I tell them like we're launching in the Netherlands, potentially 16 million people, that's a much easier sell to them. So I think it takes a little bit of time for some of these things to get bootstrapped. And I think what's probably more likely to happen is that something like Paystack is going to move to the other side of the ocean. And then all of a sudden we have a lot more flexibility with regards to payment options that could maybe not necessarily be built locally because of like economic constraints. So yeah, there are a bunch of things happening, but it's not the fastest startup space that you will encounter. For a weird reason, I am more in tune with the startup space in the Gambia than in my own country, which is really weird. Yeah, now I definitely feel like I have to go back.
Let's hope you manage to get back soon.
Yeah.
So again, about you. So it says, and as a senior tech person, how often do you get to work with tech people like you of different ethnic backgrounds? Is Berlin different from the Netherlands this way?
Different ethnic backgrounds.
Yeah.
So I work with a lot of people who are in Germany. I work with a lot of people that are not necessarily ethnically German. They're mostly from India or China, or so there are not a lot of people of African descent. And I did talk to a couple of them. I know a couple of CTOs as well. Some of them are now doing other things, but usually you can count the number of folks that look like they are of African descent on maybe two hands. If two hands is a good count. One hand is more like it, I guess. But there are plenty of them. You just have to find them. They're sometimes hidden in really curious pockets, but they're definitely there. In the Netherlands, I had contact with a lot more of them because I spent more time in the Netherlands. I think with time, I find more of these pockets in Berlin as well. But I think there's so many different dynamics at play here, because I was at a meeting not too long ago which I thought was just basically going to be like, oh, this whole BLM thing has happened, it's ongoing. Here's a bunch of tech people talking about what we're experiencing and maybe being a support group to each other. And I walked into that meeting to hear that almost all of them are out of tech. So I guess that apparently a lot of people move out as well. Maybe that's also why I don't always catch them. But yeah, there's some communities that I'm in touch with where you can get good vibes from people, exchange ideas, collaborate. So I think it's just a matter of just being persistent and keep going to places, meeting people, telling people that you want to meet other folks that are like of African descent, like volunteering, and then through that route, just you bump into folks that think like you.
Yeah, or come to Akwaaba Fest in Paris, or come to these events as well, because wouldn't have met David otherwise. So we're having events like this very regularly up until the festival. So again, yes, it is a shameless plug, but it is part of, it's like a direct answer to what
Absolutely.
David's saying. So another question, do you find that people typically assess your level of competence, technical competence, where it is, or do people underestimate you?
They underestimate me, but that's okay because then it's like a double whammy. You can hit them like boom, and then they're surprised. And it's always kind of like nice to like see them like do that double take, like so I do feed off that. And I think that's my mechanism of coping with the frustration, because I'll be on a flight to a client and or a conference, and the person sitting next to me who hears I go to the conference is like, oh, so you're the entertainer. And I'm like, okay,
Wow.
that gets old quickly, but it just keeps happening. And I think that some people, at least in some bubbles, are starting to become aware of this. And there are people that are really helping out. I think like when you're in like the cloud space, you probably know Kelsey Hightower. Like folks like Kelsey Hightower are changing the game for all of us, because he's a leader in cloud technologies, mostly Kubernetes. He is the best speaker you'll ever hear. And I mean, like, he's basically reprogrammed a lot of those typical startup bro or typical I'm a network engineer, like the type of nerds, to understand like, holy smokes, these guys, these folks, these guys and gals can do anything just like us, and normalize the idea. I think a lot of this has to do with just seeing more and more of it. And that's why stuff like, I think like stuff like Obama was like so pivotal for all of us, because seeing a person of African descent as the leader of the free world changes the frame. Like Tiam, who was the CEO of, I think, one of the elite Swiss banks, doing such a great job. That is something that we need to like reframe what people interpret when they see us. And the thing is, I think we need a lot more founders, but I also understand that sometimes it's frustrating because I hear founders bumping against doors and almost running out of steam at some point, and then having to make really pragmatic choices like, well, I got bills to pay, I have a child to feed, so I'm just gonna get out of this this founding game and take a job. And I think by finding people in our communities to act as a support system, but also to act as our kind of like our advocates, we can overcome or survive this to the next level where we can finally start reinvesting back into the community and thrive. But yeah, like people underestimate me. I talk to my buddies about it, and that helps.
Great. Great. You said everything perfectly, so there's not really much to add. But I did want to say the stuff you were saying in the latter half about founders and that experience. If I'm correct, Dr. Nakeem is really passionate about that as well. So feel free to follow her on social media. You never know. You never know what she's going to be empowered to do for Black founders. Watch this space. So who knows? But we're all rooting for her and hope that we can all get there one day. Okay, so I don't see any more questions. There's a question that I'm going to leave to the very end. There's another one here, but I do want to, I'm going to be cheeky and get my own question in, which is, you spoke about DD, aka due diligence. What is that and how does it work?
Okay, so the due diligence is effect as a startup. If you're trying to get funded, depending on which stage you're at, if you're just going for a seed round, you probably just get the money. But if you're going for anything over a couple mil, usually investors, they have investors, so they have to be able to explain to them that this was a well thought through choice. And that's when they get different parties involved to do a due diligence. It could be a legal DD to find out, like, is there some legal debt that we will have to pay at some point, maybe weird legal structures or contracts with different parties. Is there like some other form of like debt that we may have to identify in a different discipline? But on my side, I do the tech DD part. So we look at the technology, look at the team, the processes, and then figure out like whatever they're pitching, is that feasible given whatever we're seeing there in terms of skill sets, current technology. And yeah, that's more or less it. We write reports, and then the investor has something to base a decision on, or at least something to save their asses when they have to report to their own investors. So that's usually how it goes, and it's mostly for mostly deals that are considerably larger than seed rounds.
Do you have any funny anecdotes of like people using an Excel spreadsheet instead of a database or something, and you being like, don't
So the thing
invest?
is, when you're doing like, if you like when you're raising a seed round, you probably do that type of stuff, and that's fine because you have to just be quick and testing some prototype. So it's totally okay. When you're doing a seed round, series A or B, you're supposed to not like rely on database like spreadsheets like they were databases. I didn't see a company use spreadsheets yet. But I work with like a friend of mine who runs a DD company, and he has done over 300 of those, and they have seen it all. So they have definitely also seen people use like weird things like spreadsheets, or, oh, by the way, that was the recent one we spoke about like a week ago. A company that was using FTP to run like a web platform, and it wasn't SFTP. It was like, yeah, FTP. Somewhere in the world, there's still a startup deploying so over FTP, and that put a smile on my face because I just thought about my old days, like back in the days when you were like just FTPing into a server, dropping some stuff in there. Like I almost forgot that feeling.
By the way, if I'm correct, FTP is file transfer protocol. And I won't go into why that's not the best thing to do because we don't have time. But if you have any questions about that in particular, now's probably the time to ask. So another kind of general question is, what about queer representation in the tech space? Do you see any?
I see some, and that's beautiful because the person that I work with is also like not well queer, LGBTQI, trans, and I hear stories from Chris effectively who has gone through a lot of these weird episodes as well. But see, I think that's also part of community. Like they are basically my champions. I am their champion. So I'm like supporting people around me who are all kind of like in this group that sometimes gets overlooked. And because we know that, we can support each other. And that is important for us emotionally, but also for our business because I can help Chris out with certain things and Chris can help me out with certain things. And that's community, I guess. I see more of that. I think also the conversations that we're having about raising awareness about our ignorance is helping us move in a healthier direction. So I'm actually quite hopeful about all of those topics because I do feel that within my bubble, I have to say that things are changing. Yeah.
That's a lovely answer. So the big one, the most requested question to ask is what advice would you give to a person starting in the tech world and trying to enter it? And I'll add to that data as well, because someone else asked about getting into data. So what advice would you give to someone starting out?
Learn statistics. Um, if you want to add linear algebra to it, that's a really good fundamental to have in the pocket. And get your hands dirty. Nothing beats experience. I think that like one thing that I've done early on, get my hands dirty with projects that threw me into the deep end, which is something that works for me. So pick something that's challenging. You probably learn most from that, and you probably learn what not to do, which is probably the most important thing to know anyways. So learn those things and find yourself mentors. Just talk to people about problems. Most folks who are a lot more senior than you are, they all drink coffee, they all eat lunch. Figure out when they're doing that. Tell them that you're buying them coffee. Maybe don't do it when it's Corona. I probably have to put a disclaimer there so I don't get sued. But like something like that. Find people around you that are capable and willing to guide you along and bounce ideas off of them as a sparring partner. I do that today. I mean, like I don't consider myself senior, but I guess for a lot of other people, I would be considered relatively senior. And I have my mentors that I talk to on a regular basis, and they help me navigate the complexity of life. So yeah, I guess we all need some of that. And that's the fastest way to learn, because at the end of the day, I think knowing where to find information through your network is sometimes more valuable than reading through all the books that you can read yourself. Because at the end of the day, there's just too much information out there, and your network can help you focus what might be more important. And that's basically how I operate now.
Cool. I guess since we've got a great network sitting in front of us on Zoom, especially data, where would you say is a good place to go and learn?
Towards data science is a nice one. I still track that on a regular. Data. So what I did in the beginning, I basically worked through a couple of Coursera courses. I didn't finish them, but like I also do it even now. Recently, actually, I walked my way through another one of what was it? Andrew Ng's organization.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'm a fangirl.
Something with a black logo. I don't know anymore. But anyways, they constantly push out new courses. And I'm basically just doing them to test, like, is my knowledge up to date? Do I understand what I maybe read in that one vague paper a while ago? And that is definitely one of the resources that I rely on. And then I have friends that are, again, my network. I almost on a weekly basis drink beers with this guy who has a PhD in machine learning, who knows everything that would be stupid when I say it. And he saves me a lot of pain. So I have to say, like, just find smart people around you. Surround yourself by people that are smarter than you.
Okay, interesting. And how would you advise for someone to do that given this current public health situation?
I think that's a tough one, Corona. I'm not so sure. Like, I think we all have in our network, we have a couple of people that know folks. I think introductions work better. So just ask someone who you know that is doing cool things in tech space to pair you with a possible mentor. And there are organizations that provide mentoring, and technicolor.eu. Just check it out. Like, they will be able to help you find people that are brilliant and willing to help. So yeah, there are a couple of platforms that you can actually utilize for that.
Cool, wonderful. So technicolor.eu got their second plug. The Andrew courses that you're talking about, I know there are the Coursera classic ones, so I think we'll link that. But when we had our first Akwaaba talk as well, we had people were giving loads of recommendations. So we'll share that in a post-event email as well. We have 5 minutes to go. Any burning questions? So there's one that's, what's your latest fun project?
Latest fun project. Okay, on my desk right now, I have this this FPGA board lying because we were playing around with basically new open source software, because I'm trying to be more involved in open source as well. And we're testing out whether we could make a very basic chip design with simply open source tooling. Really kind of like challenging still. So not everything worked out there, but my internal R&D projects are possibly the more fun ones, because we get to do whatever the hell we want, but no one is paying for them. So they just cost me money, but they're the fun ones to do. And it's sometimes, if we're lucky, we have then a client somewhere down the line who needs that basically that experience. So then we can basically utilize that. But right now, the fun project are the 3 boards on my desk. One is an automotive board with 3 cores in it for safety requirements that we're basically building a firmware platform around and trying to get OTA working. And then we have this other thing with the FPGA where we're basically trying to figure out a fully open source Fluss pipeline to do basic chip design. Yeah, those ones I enjoy.
Wow. Okay. So I'm gonna say no more questions. What was I gonna? So we didn't even talk about how you're currently in a hotel and that's part of the job and that's life. So what is the traveling like? Because if you're traveling during a pandemic, that means usually you're probably traveling quite a lot. Am I right?
No. Yeah, well, maybe yes. Yeah. Yeah, so I guess this one happened sometimes. So the trick about DDs is like maybe not everyone would need DD, but sometimes the investor needs it, because as I said, the investor has investors that need certain documentation in place to avoid lawsuits. This one basically popped up and they decided it has to happen pronto, which means we have to board a flight and get the job done. And the problem with DDs is that like you can try to do them like remotely, but you're basically auditing another company, and people loosen up when you're there in person. So in some cases, we're required to head out there and court them effectively to get whatever we need to know out of them, such that we can make some form of an assessment. So yeah, this basically 2 days ago, I heard about we're gonna have to do this. So here we are. Tomorrow I can go back, and then I have to self-quarantine until my test results are in. That's the game. It's a lot easier when there is no corona, obviously.
Yeah, but that's like, I mean, if they're flying you out in a pandemic, 1, the money is really there, and 2, like the work has to be very, very important if they're like, you need to go to Vienna now, kind of thing, which is
the fun thing is about investors. You have different types of investors, right? And some of them, they work more on a relationship basis, especially if they can manage more of their own money, or if they can get their own investors to basically accept that they have a certain investment thesis that might be unique to other investment firms. Many investors basically have to do reporting to their boards, and whenever they make calls in companies and they don't work out, people can start asking like, why the hell did you consider this a good play? And that's when they need something like this to help at least them understand like, okay, maybe I'm not technically versed enough. What is really there? And you can already imagine, like for me, I would not be able to assess a company, like the full scope of a company, because I can't do a legal DD. I can't look at their books. Like I can see their books and kind of like make sense of them because I do that for my own company. But like diving into those nitty-gritty details and recognizing patterns of this looks fishy, that is something that only someone who does this over and over again can kind of like do. And I think that's what we then do on the technical end. So you can rest assured that this investor has hired another firm for the legal part or firm for the financial part, and who knows what else they hired someone for to make sense of it. And at the end of the day, it's not super much money, I guess, considering the size of the deal, most likely. So I think the risk, or the cost of the DD versus the risk of messing up and not having a good excuse for why they did, that doesn't balance out the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. And lastly, where can we find you? Because I really want to know about the next showcase project that you do. So where can we find you on social media?
On Vbina, at Vbina, on GitHub, on Instagram, on Twitter, on LinkedIn. So my handle everywhere is more or less Vbina. VID, last 3 letters of my first name, VINA, last 4 letters of my last name.
Yay. Cool. I don't have any questions. I just want to say a huge thank you to David, and I'm gonna clap because I'm the only one that you can hear. It was
Y'all
great.
very much. It was lovely being here. I mean, like, just today's DD was grueling, and this was definitely my therapy class. So now I'm a little bit charged up, and now I have to just run out to a dinner, socially distanced, of course. And I hope to see some of y'all soon. I know that some people are in the chat that I'm actually talking to really soon, so I'm really looking forward to that. Some AI company, Codis.ai. Woo! Plug for Codis AI.
Well, thank you so much, everyone.
I might interject just very quickly. I think my Lisa is in the chat. If is it
Our connection has failed her.
I thought that's what I thought that was
the call, if she wants to say a word about Codist, as you wish.
I don't see all the people in the call right now.
Okay, yeah, but I don't think she's here. I'm at M and I can't see.
I don't think she's still here. She might have been here earlier.
Yeah. But anyone is free to unmute themselves and say hi, but you're also free to go. So thank you so much for your time, especially if you're in France and you stayed here until the end of, till the beginning of the curfew. We really appreciate that. So have a lovely evening. See you next
Y'all
month.
take care. Y'all stay safe and healthy.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.